Welcome to Asia Global Online. My name is Alejandro Reyes. I'm Director of Knowledge Dissemination and Associate Professor at the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. And I manage Asia Global Online, the digital journal of the Asia Global Institute. Trending now on Asia Global Online is an article by two friends of ours from Singapore that look at digital divides and the impact of COVID-19 on the digital divides that when a disease sort of uncovers these digital divides. We have joining us from Singapore, Irene Ng of the National University of Singapore. She is Associate Professor of Social Work and Director of the Social Service Research Center at NUS. Also with us is Sun Sun Lim, of the Singapore University of Technology and Design. Sun Sun is Professor of Communication and Technology and Head of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences at SUTD. Welcome to you both. In your article, you talk about how it is time to realize that, especially in the context of the global pandemic, to realize that access to digital services is as much a need as electricity and water. You talk about the educational and employment exclusions due to the digital divides that have been exacerbated by the lockdowns caused by this unprecedented public health crisis. So I'm wondering, Irene, if you could talk a little bit about this. What sort of attracted your attention to write about this very important topic, because it is something that we may not think about. Schools closed and universities, secondary, primary, all levels, and students had to work online, and in particular, and then people, of course, in offices, workers had to work at home, but we often take it for granted that everybody has access, but in fact, that's not the case.
Right, yeah. My research has been on poverty, inequality, and social mobility. And even before the pandemic, I have made mention to how technology is an area that unequalizes for low-income individuals, both students as well as adults. Because without technology in today's world, we won't have access to a lot of opportunities, right? And so when the pandemic came in Singapore, when we had our version of our lockdown, there was really a scramble when low-income children didn't have devices or internet access, and the charities were working with donors to quickly get devices for the children. And I saw that, it's a time for us to really think about digital access as something that are needs, no longer just based on your personal ability to pay. And that's when I explored the idea with Sun Sun, because this is an area that she's very familiar with, and I've had a good working relationship with her. So we wrote this together. Yeah.
Now, Sun Sun, it's hard enough, I think, the debate over, say, whether people have the right to access to water and sanitation, that's actually been a long-running debate that most people think that this is the case, but there's still people who say, well, we should, it's not necessarily a sort of a human right to have access to utilities. What are your thoughts in terms of whether the world is coming around to this idea that digital services should be considered on the same par as electricity and water?
Maybe I'll answer a bit more on the water aspect, and then I'll ask Susan to answer about technology. For me, as a poverty researcher, we always get some opposing views, right? When we want to advocate for greater access for low income. Yeah, and that's why in our article we wrote about the question on deservingness. Yeah, so there's always this question. Yeah, but no matter what, I mean, when we think about people as humanity, what we need for basic survival, right? I think for me, I really think that these are needs, right? And UN is very strong in championing these needs. And
Yes.
in the last few years, they have included digital inclusion, full digital inclusion as part of those things that are needs, right? Besides water.
Okay. And Sunsun, do you have a...
So obviously with electricity and water, it's quite straightforward. It's either you have it or you don't. And in the case of water, ideally it should be clean water. And in the case of electricity, then you have to think about sort of the consistency of supply, whether it's reliable and so on. In the case of digital access, it's rather more complex because obviously you're talking about not just hardware, you're also talking about software, you're also talking about internet access. And then of course, there's the whole issue of competencies, right? And that's why the whole conversation around universal digital access is rather more cumbersome and yet no less important. And obviously in countries like Singapore, for example, where we've got the access sorted out, then it becomes an issue of equipping the less advantaged with the right skills to be able to use them. In other countries where, even access is an issue and even access to electricity is an issue, then we've got to take different approaches. But overall, when you look at how the world is digitalizing, and as we say in the article, so much of education, so much of employment is now very deeply intertwined with universal digital access, or with digital access rather. We can't actually stop looking at digital access as something that is a luxury. It really is a fundamental need that everybody needs in order to uplift themselves.
Well, what about the issue of the provision of the services and pricing and profits? Because this isn't a matter when you talk about water, whether is it right to privatize the provision of water and sanitation so that companies that do provide these services can make a profit, or should they be, considered a public good that should be free, or and then of course there's the sustainability dimension of saying, well, if people don't know the actual value of the water, they won't know how to conserve it. And so I'm wondering on that score, what are your thoughts on
Right.
these issues?
Well, I think whether we go about it by private or public provision, I think around the world there's recognition that there still needs to be heavy government intervention in such things such as water. That's why we call them public utilities in most cases, right? Even if a private provider is there, the government is involved to control prices because water is something so basic, right? So as Sansan was saying, that with devices, technology, it gets more complicated, but I think we could follow the model of in most developed countries where we do see piped water, clean water, right, as something that the government is heavily involved in either provision or intervention or in terms of controlled prices.
And in terms of private sector support, we also make the argument for technology taxes. If you think about countries like Indonesia, Philippines, there are actually technology companies that are able to monetize a lot of the data from the usage by even the bottom of pyramid users. And so you're looking at bottom of pyramid users whose value is being extracted for the profits of these technology companies. So the question of fairness is raised, right? How do you then transfer some of this value that you've gotten from these people back to them?
Interesting. Now, Irene, I'm wondering if I could talk to you a bit about your research. Last year, you co-authored an article on how reducing debt improves psychological functioning and changes decision-making in the poor. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about that, but also, I mean, if I think about the pandemic now, I would, one danger, if you will, is that people will be going more and more into debt, particularly the lower income groups. And that will certainly have this sort of psychological dimension to it that we may not actually think about.
Right, yeah. That paper actually was written together with my two co-authors, Auxilian and Walter Teixeira. And it was very interesting because that year, there was a charity that really just relieved debt for people. And it was a bit controversial because we don't typically think of helping people in debts because we think of this as a personal problem. But with the research, we do find that debt on top of poverty has additional immediate psychological impact, and people's cognitive ability is impaired, and also their psychological symptoms of distress were heightened, right? So when the debt relief came, all these just came down. Yeah. um, that said, a one-time debt relief can't be the solution, right?
Yes.
What we are seeing now with, as we continue to look at the data, that as people continue to be in low wages, their debt will pile up again. So in relation to this pandemic, then a lot of people becoming more psychological distressed, right? As they maybe lose jobs or wages salaries are not coming in, that definitely will have an impact on people's psychological functioning, people's mental bandwidth. So relief in this sense is very important. So these are the times when nations just have to come in and provide those unemployment insurance, wage subsidies, right, to tide people over. Yeah, but it's really in unprecedented times.
Now, Irene, I can pursue. So you also look at poverty, inequality, intergenerational mobility, youth employment, social welfare policy. These are your research interests. Now, I'm mindful that Singapore just had a general election. I'm wondering whether some of the issues that you're looking into, did they play fairly prominent? Were they prominent issues in the recent general election? Of course, I'm sure that the government's performance in dealing with the pandemic was first and foremost. But what are some of the issues that you're working on that were paramount in the election?
Yeah, I think several of the opposition party members alluded to the inequality as a problem. In the last few years, this has been highlighted. And it's not just a Singapore problem, actually, it's globally, I think, social inequalities have risen. And in fact, in Singapore, we have managed this a bit better. Inequalities have decreased in the last decade, but not as much as what we would hope. And going forward, I think inequality is going to be something that's very important.
Interesting. Now, Sun Sun, you have a new book out called Transcendent Parenting, Raising Children in the Digital Age, published by Oxford University Press. What do you mean by transcendent parenting? And what are some of the issues that you took up in that book?
Right. So this was actually a combination of all my years of work of looking at families and how they domesticate technology. And what I noticed was in the last 5 to 10 years, we were seeing the intensification of mobile communication in families, and it was changing the way families were connecting with each other. And clearly that helped to, in some ways, sort of redefine how parents parent. And it also changed the dynamics of the supervision that parents would try to exercise over their kids. So when I say transcendent parenting, I talk about how parents actually use technology to transcend the physical distance between themselves and their kids. So they're constantly offering some kind of parental supervision, even if their kids are away in school or at enrichment class or out for a party. I also talk about how parents then have to transcend both the online social interaction spaces that their kids are in, as well as their offline spaces. And then I also talk about how, because of the connectivity that parents always enjoy with their kids, that the whole issue of parenting then becomes timeless. So they have to transcend the whole timelessness of parenting and the entire relentlessness of it all. Relating to COVID-19, what was fascinating was that obviously you were finding parents suddenly physically with their kids all the time, but that they were having to parent very constantly using all of these technology platforms that their kids were using to educate themselves, or rather to access educational services. So that brought in a whole different angle altogether.
Interesting. Now, what do you see then as the possible permanent effect or impact of the pandemic on the digital parenting challenge, if you will? Are we going to see anything that's changed because of the pandemic that will be lasting, or that we'll have to look into, for much more in depth?
So in my book, I actually talk about how there is a growing turn towards using technological platforms for parents to communicate with teachers and with schools. And to some extent, that actually relieves parents' concerns that they can't, they can't be at work and helping their kids with their schoolwork. But I also mentioned in my book how that has potential downsides, because the overwhelming metrics that are being captured about the child's performance in school is then eyeballed by the parents, and it sometimes creates situations of tension or mistrust between parent and child. My concern is that with the COVID-19 and the intensified use of technology, more and more parents are actually now aware of these kinds of platforms, and they may want to demand greater usage of these platforms without necessarily recognizing the overall long-term adverse implications.
Thank you. Now, can I ask both of you, because of course you're sort of still in a kind of semi-lockdown, not a full-on lockdown, and so you've been doing teaching online. Can you tell us a bit about your experiences, how you found it, how your students have found it, Irene?
Yeah, I teach mostly social workers who are working.
Yes.
So our classes are at night, and it's interesting because then their kids will be coming in and out of the screen.
Right.
They're trying to, hide away from the kids, and it's at the end of a long day. Yeah.
Has it been a good experience, or did you find that the online teaching was not what you expected, or it didn't provide the kind of teaching experience, both in terms of your ability to teach as well as the learning, that it was lacking in effectiveness?
In my experience, it was good and bad. I think it was good that sometimes my social work students, they might have to be late for class because they have urgent matters to address at work. But with online, they can get to the class more easily. But then these social workers do appreciate having personal interaction, and our classes are more interactive. So I think we lose that element of interaction and having a physical discussion, robust discussion, because you have to wait turns to talk, like over Zoom like this.
Sun, how has your experience been in?
So I think we're quite blessed because of the scarring experience of SARS. Every year after that, all the universities in Singapore would do something called e-learning week. So it would prepare us for the next big disaster. Well, guess what? It did happen 17 years later. And so unlike other industries, we were able to transition very quickly. So I think the delivery to the students of classes was sort of unbroken, but the quality, you're right, there are certain trade-offs. And yet we also saw among ourselves, our colleagues, when we exchanged notes, we found that there were, for example, students who were a little bit more reticent in face-to-face settings, becoming a lot more engaged in the class content. And I think in some ways, the online learning platform caters to certain learning styles better than the face-to-face one, which might have, issues of social performance, performance anxiety, and so on. So pluses and minuses for different students.
Now, I'm mindful that we're in the summer session, I suppose. I mean, like we are here at Hong Kong U. What are the prospects for a return to the classroom in Singapore? What are your thoughts on that?
Right. In my university, we have been encouraged to mostly still do online, but those who do want to have physical classes, we have to submit for and put up the reasons. Yeah. can I add something? Again, back to our article on
Yes.
digital access, right? This online learning has really also unearthed the issue of people having to connect from home where the internet connection is not reliable. Yeah, so this really again highlighted how if you don't have the ability to afford, right, either a good device or the internet connection, then they just shut out from this. And yeah,
I think that's actually an important point that some people don't think about, especially in the age where we emphasize the mobile devices. People think, oh, you can do everything with your mobile device. But in fact, when it comes to learning and in employment, certainly issues, that it's still important to have at least a laptop or a desktop computer, but then that adds the expense, the challenge.
Because I've had students who had to then go and subscribe for a higher bandwidth, you know, and they might be using data previously, then they have to start subscribing. And if you can't afford it, then you just can't do it, right? So
yes.
Then, and they say, oh, I didn't get the class because I was in and out, I couldn't afford.
Yes, yes. Now, we're going to close soon, but I wanted to ask you guys, because you are in two different institutions. Irene, you're at NUS, and Sun, you're at SUTD. So I love it when there's collaboration. So tell me how did you guys get together in terms of, because this is great to have two institutions collaborating and working together and, coming together to do an article.
Well, it was actually, remarkably fortuitous timing. I was previously a nominated member of parliament, and at that time, because of the COVID-19 revealing a lot of cracks in the system, one of the issues that was coming up was obviously children from less advantaged homes not being able to access the home-based learning as effectively as they could. And so one of my parliamentary colleagues was raising a motion to speak about this very issue. And because of the research that I'd done previously, invited me to join in. And then Irene contacted me about writing something. And so not only did we write the article, we also, I also shared our views and insights in Parliament in a speech on the motion.
Great. And Irene, how are you, looking forward? Are you guys going to do more collaboration on this issue? Or?
We don't know. It was, so after that article, that we wrote one article that was more to the Singapore audience, and Sansa was like, we have to write another one for the international audience. Of course, right? Because the issue is not just...
Yes.
But Sansa is great to work with, so I'd be happy to collaborate.
Well, I think that's what education is all about these days, right? Collaboration. So it would be very good. And we're very happy to collaborate with you guys in bringing your insights to our audience. So thank you very much. Wonderful to have you join us from Singapore. And we really hope to do more work with you in the future. I commend to our viewers Irene and Sun's article, which is available on AsiaGlobal Online. Please subscribe to AsiaGlobal Online, to the AsiaGlobal Institute, to get information from the Institute. Please subscribe to our social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. And thank you very much for joining us, Irene and Sun, and thank you very much to our viewers.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for giving me a chance to catch Irene too.
Right. We're very happy to bring you guys together.
The process was no face-to-face.
Yes, no, exactly. Exactly. All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Have a nice week ahead.
See you.